Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for the Customer Success Bootcamp series, and this one focused on interviewing and job search. So really excited to have both Tim and Bobby with us together to talk about their experiences, both on the interviewee and interviewer side, and what the entire process was like. So Bobby, Tim, thanks for making it back to Baruch and being part of this.
Thanks for having us again, Justyn.
So I'm gonna just kick off. I think, first comes first. Like, we're gonna put this in a thought process of what the interview process is like and what interviewers are looking for if you're interviewing for a customer success role. But would love to hear from both of you about what the process was like for both of you in finding your CSM job where you are now when you were searching. So Tim, I'll hand it over to you first.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, for those on the call, thanks so much for joining. So I'm Tim. I'm a customer success manager at Optimove, which is a predictive analytics digital personalization firm that helps customers really scale segmentation and CRM marketing. And previously, I've been a customer success manager, really like working client relationship management across a few different tech startups, with both within MarTech, FinTech, advising clients like Staples, Intel Corporation, Hartford Insurance Company on digital marketing strategy. And it's really been sort of full cycle customer success. So everything from managing clients post-sale, from renewals, quarterly business reviews, through to renewals, upsells, and beyond. And so my search for Optimove, I was trying to think, where do I want to work next? I've worked in machine learning, predictive analytics, so wanted to stay within that space. And I started my search not really shooting my resume out to anyone, not applying with cover letters or anything like that. And my outreach solely was limited to LinkedIn. And I put together a few slides on how I do it because thought the visual might help here, and so I'll share my screen for a sec. But the way that I think about it is, you're gonna, if you apply to a lot of jobs and write cover letters for all of them, not to say you shouldn't do this, but it's a heavy lift and it's a low hit rate. Tons of people are applying to jobs that are in demand, and so you're gonna get tons of no callbacks or rejections after no callback, especially because a lot of the firms have, shortlisted candidates that are either referrals internally, things like that. And so they'll go through that. So the way that I like to get into the interview process is by reaching out both to the hiring manager directly. So if I'm applying to a customer success role, I'll look up VP customer success at target company, director of customer success at target company, and I'll hit them up on LinkedIn, try to connect with them, and then try to set up a meeting. And I'll also do that with team members who are in the role. So I'll also look up, customer success manager, Optimove, or whatever firm is your target firm, because I've seen that it really accelerates the process. I mean, those who are in the role, are open to speaking because they often get a referral bonus if you eventually get hired, anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000, depending on what the company is. Most companies have referral programs, some don't. And for the hiring manager, you're cutting out a lot of time that they spend looking. If you're that right candidate for them, they don't like reading all these cover letters. They want to hire as quickly as possible, and so you're helping them achieve what their goal is. And so just to quickly show some examples, in terms of the initial connection request. So, I've never spoken to this person before. I found whatever it is, VP of marketing at Optimove or Salesforce or wherever you're trying to apply. And I just do a quick, hi, person's name, show a little excitement. Hope your week's kicking off well. My name's Tim, and I'm currently in the final semester of my MBA, having worked in predictive analytics and digital personalization previously. Love how your team's innovating in the MarTech space and would like to connect on LinkedIn. So I'm structuring it with, hey, here's who I am. Here's my value prop, like, MBA, I've also worked in the space that you've worked in, so I'm personalizing to them and showing that I have experience in their space, and then just showing excitement to them. Love how your team's innovating in the MarTech space, and then super low pressure ask. I'm not asking them to get on the phone. I'm not asking them anything. Just want to connect on LinkedIn. From there, I have two routes that I go. One is for the hiring manager and one's for the team member that we'll go through momentarily. If it's the hiring manager, I know that they're the one that I want to talk to. So again, hi, my name's Tim. Again, value prop, currently in the final semester of my MBA, having worked in customer success, and then expanding on the value prop. I've advised clients like Staples, Intel Corporation, JP Morgan on digital marketing strategy. So I'm adding credibility. I've worked with these enterprise clients. You guys work with enterprise clients. Yay. And I saw your team's hiring for an associate director of customer success. And here's the ask that I have, and was wondering if there's someone best to connect with to learn more about the role and see whether it's a fit. Again, super low pressure ask. I'm not asking to meet with them. They know that they're the right person because they're the hiring manager. And so that generally opens a conversation. They're happy to give you time. They might say, hey, so great to meet you. And once you get on the phone with them, if all goes well, now you have a champion that's leading you through the entire process. And it's the hiring manager. So they want to hire you. They want their team to like you. You now have this white glove, you're shortlisted on the list there. And so for the example, for the team member, again, many team members have referral programs. I do it slightly differently. And, same thing, hey, final semester of my MBA, adding value prop, having worked in customer success across a few different MarTech firms. You're a MarTech firm, I've worked in MarTech, great. And then I've been considering whatever company it is as a target company and would love to learn more about your role if you'd be open to connecting on a quick call sometime later this week or next. Again, it's a super low pressure ask. I'm showing interest in learning about them. People love to discuss about themselves. And because I've showed, value prop, MBA, having worked at MarTech firms, and, I'm just considering Salesforce as a target company. It's not like I need to work at Salesforce or can you get me a job at Salesforce? Just want to learn more about it. And often I find people are very happy to talk with students, and especially since often there are referral programs at companies, if we can make their team member $1,000, $5,000, whatever that might be, if they refer me and I end up getting the job, again, helps me get into the interview process. You often skip the, phone call with HR or the recruiter, things like that. So just briefly wanted to touch on like what my LinkedIn outreach strategy has been. And I can tell you, having done both, applying to 100 jobs with cover letters, getting 5 notes back versus LinkedIn outreach, sending notes to 10 people with whatever it is, a 60 to 80% hit rate in terms of getting them on the phone. It's just like, at least for me personally, has worked out super well to get into the interview process by way of LinkedIn rather than other methods. Just wanted to kick it off with that.
Bobby, before we head to you, Tim, one of the questions that might be on somebody's mind, though, is somebody who's career pivoting and a grad student. And I think one thing that you can do, could you bring up that the deck if you have it open again?
Yes.
There's some really good messaging here. I just want to highlight really good messaging here, right? So basically being able to also say, if you don't have experience like Tim does, and Bobby's going to share his, right? Being able to say, my name is Tim, I'm in the final semester of my MBA. I've been learning about customer success roles and what they're about with talking with alums who are at places like Adobe and Optimove and other MarTech firms. I'd love to meet. And then if you scroll down to your last slide, I've been considering Salesforce as a target company and would love to know more about your role, right? So you can mend this. one of the things you're doing here, right, is you are mending the fact that, hey, I know about customer success. I don't want this to be about you teaching me customer success, although I'm going to learn about it. Because I've been talking with people about it, but I'd love to learn about your role. And this is a really great way of making, like you said, make it really easy for that person to be like, okay, I think this is going to be a good conversation. So let's make it happen. Instead of, oh my God, this is going to be a student who's just blindly just reaching out, right? And and toying with the idea. This is super helpful. Bobby, I know you did similar things. We'd love to hear also about what your experience. Tim, thanks for sharing that. That was awesome.
All I was going to say is that I should have listened to Tim in my own job search because
Right.
I applied to over 200 jobs. I still have to this day, just somewhat as a motivating factor. I have the spreadsheet that I created of all the like no responses or rejection letters or whatever I got back. To give everybody an idea, to Tim's point, my hit rate was very, very low. I had maybe 3 total interviews out of those 200 jobs, and this is spread across not just CSM, but all different roles. Funny enough, quick story here. The day I got my offer letter from Adobe, I got a rejection from Google to be a customer success manager without any interview whatsoever, and thought to myself, one of you is very, very wrong about me, and I really hope it's Google. So similarly to Tim, I did reach out to people at the company or saw if I knew people. So one of the things that I tell pretty much all Baruch students is one of the things I did was I would look to see who Justyn was connected to, not to throw Justyn under the bus, but then I would write a very quick like cover type email, send it to Justyn, make it super easy. Here's the link of what I'm applying to. Here's the person that looks like you're connected to on LinkedIn. And here's why I think I'd be a good fit for this role. Do you mind sending this along? I did that with other people that weren't just Justyn, but I'd see who in my network was connected and send similar messages. Eventually, did get an interview at Adobe and managed to land the role at Adobe, which I'm happy to go further into. But really, I should have listened to Tim because it would have saved me so much time of applying to those 200 or 300 jobs that I did.
And actually, it really is a good tie to what Tim just went through with Bobby too, making it really easy for the person that is connected to the person that you want to connect to. Be like, can I connect with your connection? And here are 3 bullet points of how I fit this role that so to make it really easy for them to be like, okay, this is not going to be a waste of time, or this makes sense. And this is what, that's great. I mean, so both of you are really communicating a lot of the same things, which is perfect. So let's talk about the interview. So you made these connections, you reached out, you got the call. What's that first round look like? Bobby, what was that first round looking like for you, whether it was at Adobe or for other CSM roles?
Yeah, it sounds like I had a different path than Tim because Tim used the SMART method and like skipped all the initial stuff. So I will say mine was a multi-round interview, meaning there were like 3 or 4 different interviews I had to go through. The first one was a screening call with someone essentially just from HR, making sure I was a culture fit. The second one was with another customer success manager. And again, it was somewhat of another culture call, but she did also ask questions like, what was the last thing you purchased online? And how would you make that experience better? So she was trying to get an idea if I had an idea about digital experiences. The next 2 were much more difficult. I had to present I was given a prompt and I had to present to a panel of very experienced customer success managers as if I was giving an SDR while I was given very little information on the actual customer or what their history was or anything like that. I spent hours upon hours upon hours reviewing that deck. I reached out to CSMs that I knew at other companies and said, hey, what do you think of this deck? Let me run you through what I have. Am I missing anything? I reached out to another grad school friend of mine and said, hey, I'm great at presenting. I am terrible at making presentation decks. You are amazing with graphic design. Will you please do this for me and I will buy you a drink? And he did. For those who may or may not know him, that was Javier Arevalo. He is amazing at graphic design if you're lucky enough to be friends with him. Then the final was an escalation prompt of a customer essentially having an issue. You had to write an email summarizing pretending you were writing it to Shantanu, our CEO, summarizing what the issue was and what your next actions were. I will say my interview process was a little weird because it started in March of 2020. It was supposed to be in person. I got put in a virtual room. They sent me the wrong link, which, by the way, can happen. I ended up interviewing someone else who was interviewing for the role for about 10 minutes before we both realized that neither of us worked for Adobe yet. And then I had to frantically call the New York office saying, hey, can you tell these people that I am not ghosting them, but am in fact in the wrong room? So it is just one of those things that you may have to deal with. It makes a funny story now. One thing that I really do want to draw attention to during my interview process is I actually kind of lucked out in that I had a virtual interview. And I mean this in that I didn't have a professional workspace at the time. And in the background, I had a Spider-Man poster hanging, and you might think, where is he going with this? But one of the things that they asked me was, how do you deal with the question or a customer or someone telling you no? And I said, well, I feel like I deal pretty well with adversity. And I don't know why, I maybe was just hit by a moment of inspiration. But I turned around to my Spider-Man poster and I said, I'm going to tell you about why Spider-Man is my favorite hero. And I promise this is related. And so I started saying, unlike Superman, who has never lost a fight in basically his entire life, Spider-Man gets beat up continually, but always tries to get back up and do what the right thing is. And I very much admire that quality in him and have hoped that I've taken some of that inspiration from those comics that I've read since I was 3 and brought it into my everyday life. Later, I got the chance to talk to someone who had interviewed me, and they said, we do have a scoring system that we use. And they're basically like, one of the things that set you apart from pretty much everyone else who's interviewing for the role was that personal anecdote about Spider-Man and how you overcome adversity. And it showed both like a personality that we just thought would fit here, but also somebody who we thought would excel in the role. So there are moments to inject. I'm not saying like just start going off on random tangents, but there are moments that if you kind of get the sense, you can inject personal anecdotes and they can be beneficial, as noted by my Spider-Man story.
Totally. I love that. That's amazing. I mean, I know that was sort of off the cuff and happened to be there because of the the structure of and the format of that. But do you think you would have answered that differently, Bobby, if you weren't in your room?
I do. I think so it's weird, but I've done a bunch of podcasting and streaming and things of that nature. So I feel like being in front of a computer screen is very much a comfort zone for me. Not that I'm not quite as comfortable speaking in front of people, but I think there probably is a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
So I think, I was in my home, I was in my comfort zone. I don't know that I would have remembered that to talk about Spider-Man if it wasn't hanging right behind me. So I do actually think in that particular instance, it was very beneficial to have that particular format.
I think that's a good trigger about maybe for people to find their comfort zone when they're outside of their comfort zone might be a good thing too, if you can get yourself there. Thanks for sharing that one. All right, Tim, how about you? That interview process for you, again, whether it was Optimove or other areas and other places, what did that look like?
Oh yeah. So it started even before I got into any of the interview processes, and I, obviously looked at the website, really researched, what their products are, what they do, so that I could have a working sense of, how would I pitch this? How are they strategically differentiated from other products out there? Like, do I really understand their competitive advantage, their value props? And then I basically wrote out and probably did 10 hours of prep even before reaching out to the first person, where I thought about, one, what are all the questions that I want to ask my interviewer? And 2, what are all the questions that I want to prep for that might be asked of me, such as, what's your biggest client win? What's your biggest client loss? Tell me about a difficult client situation that you've handled. Tell me about a data-driven advice that you've given a client. And for some of them, I use the STAR method of whatever it is, basically what the issue is, situation, recommendation, and then results, so that I could show them in a structured way, here is the issue the client had. They're trying to figure out which offer to give to some segment of one of their customers. What my recommendation was, how I came up with the recommendation performing data analysis, and ultimately the recommendation I gave, and then what the results were. What business KPIs did I influence to the positive? And I tried to do that for as many questions that I thought that I could might be asked, and have been asked in interview processes in the past. And so once I had all my prep done in terms of, here are the questions I'm going to ask the interviewer, here are the questions that I can expect to be asked, and have these like mini stories that I have responses to. Actually, even before I go into that, a third thing is I really prepped for the tell me about yourself question, because you're going to be asked that question. If you can answer that concisely, confidently, and rock it to show that you're valuable, the rest of the interview really tees it up greatly. And then I also, in addition to tell me about yourself, thought about, I'll loop back to this, but my interview process, I first reached out to the VP with the exact messaging that you just saw. Had my first interview with the VP, we totally hit it off. She, accelerated me through the interview process. Second interview with the director went well. And then I had a data test that I was given, where I had to analyze data and come up with recommendations. And then also a sales presentation where I had to, the prompt was basically, pitch me any complex piece of technology. And so I did it in front of a panel of the VP, the director, as well as other customer success team members. And then my final interview was with the chief customer officer and the VP of HR, and from there got the offer. And from initial reach out to actually getting the offer was just about a month, which it isn't always the case. Obviously, companies hire at different cadences, but I felt that it really helped that, I had the VP of customer success as a champion from the beginning, and that really carried me throughout, since they were trying to make the hire.
Tim, I may have missed this. Did you have to give a presentation as well?
Yeah. So I had to pitch any piece of complex technology, because one of the things, at least in the world that I work in with machine learning and everything, is the ability to synthesize complex things into layman's terms, and to also be able to pitch the value of it. So that was their goal. Oh, one last piece that I want to remember is, before all the interview processes, I also think about what are the key things, the 3 key things that no matter what they ask me, I'm going to get out in the interview. Because people are, some people are better at hiring than others, better at asking questions than others, but like, what are the 3 key takeaways that you want to get out? For me, it was processes that I had created, revenue achievement against goals, and highlighting recommendations that influence key business KPIs. And so no matter what questions I was going to be asked, you do have to answer the questions that the interviewers ask in a way, but if someone asks you a question that's not going to help them understand whether or not they want to hire you, or doesn't highlight the things that you want to get out that show you're hireable for them, you can quickly answer it and then pivot into one of your mini stories that shows one of the 3 key pieces that you want to get out. Tell me about a difficult situation with a client, or, well, that one you should have an answer to, but it's something random. And my only goal is to get out to them that I achieved 256K in upsell revenue against a goal of 150K. So I can answer whatever question they ask me as a quick one-liner, and then go into the key value that I want to show them. So I guess the takeaway there is, like, you do have to answer the questions that they ask, but like, make sure that you get out those 3 key things that we'll show you about.
And by that you mean you mean, Tim, when you walk away from that conversation, however long it is, you want the interviewer to have tie these 3 things to you exactly.
100%.
Tim is process oriented, he's revenue generator, and the third person, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I kind of want to role play on that one, but I do want to go back onto the tell me about yourself So that presentation part that both Bobby and you talked about, which probably took so much time for you both to do, that seems to be a common theme for CSM jobs across the board. That like it's not just the 2 of you that are communicating that. So to be ready for that.
The one thing I will say about that is it's definitely one of the things, just because as a CSM, you have to be a strong presenter.
Right.
If you're not a strong presenter, you won't be good in the role. And the other thing is make sure that you rehearse it, but don't rehearse it to the point of sounding robotic, which there is somewhat of like a balance beam to have. Funny enough, and maybe not so funny, but in reflection, my dog got sick the night before I was supposed to give my presentation. He went to the animal hospital. I was very worried about him, but in the halls of the hospital, and there are people there who could like attest to this, I was reciting my presentation basically like to the people in the animal hospital and being like, what do you guys think?
Right. Right.
Just to follow up on that, like when you have the presentation, like can't even tell you how many times, like Bobby, I practice in front of a mirror saying it out loud so that it really becomes second nature. Like I know everyone works differently, but my process is I create the slides right out the flow, and then at first I'll even like read my flow out loud, and then I'll do it over and over and over, and then boil it down to just bullet points without the details. But it really helped me to go from full written out, and I even think about where am I, the transitions of sentences, how am I going to get from one to the next? And as crazy as this might sound, like where do I even add like little like a laugh in between sentences or things like that, so that everything flows smoothly as my goal is to get out.
Just to give the quick like aside of that, while I do generally rehearse my practices, as Tim, just to show that there can be a different side, as Tim points out, people operate differently. And I recognize that when I'm presenting, I actually present better generally when I'm going off the cuff. And the more I try to script things out, the more I actually trip myself up because I try to adhere to the script. And it just sounds, like I said earlier, kind of robotic, or like people ask me a question, I'll be like, no, I need to get through the script. So for me, I actually, while I definitely prepare decks and I have an idea at least of what I want to talk about, the less scripted out I am, the better. And I just want to put that out there in case someone's like, I don't really do well off scripts or whatever. You don't have to be that way.
That's a good point. And I actually love that point because, just like with networking, you've got to do it in a way that's best for you. But if you're going to go up for a CSM role, what I'm hearing, you've got to be prepared for this presentation part, and you need to do it the best way that's going to put your best face forward, your best foot forward. So appreciate that, Bobby. That's really important for sure. Want to go to also one of the things. So just quickly, Tim, let's role play the pivot from a behavioral question or another question into one of those 3 points that you want the interviewer to leave behind with that interviewer. Yeah. So Tim, tell me about a time when you've had to work on a project with a really difficult team member.
Yeah, absolutely. So, had really challenging team member. Our goal for the project was to analyze XYZ. And, as we were conducting analysis, had XYZ challenges. The great thing is that when and now I'm trying to think about where we're going to pivot or which piece we want to pivot to, is that after providing the recommendation, this was a ex-client, we were able to provide the recommendations and actually win the renewal based on this, because client was in a challenging situation. those recommendations led to the path ahead, and we were actually able to renew 500K ACV for the path ahead. And so, yeah, going from answering question to showing something that not only how we dealt with the difficult team member, but revenue generating.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. Yep. Exactly. And what was the first one? Was it about process?
Yeah, having created processes at companies before, like an upsell process for a company, or yeah, you could even go into any models that you've created in terms of how we're going to take the data and boom, I created the RFM model for how we're going to analyze all customers across recency, frequency, monetary value, product preference, etc.
I could even see, like, if you also even answer the question around, it ends up being communication is really key to relationships with team members to get work done. And then what really you got out of that experience was part of that is process, and process is really is important, right? And then you can pivot to the process message potentially. Yeah. So I love that. I love your point in general of taking opportunity to certainly not totally like left turn or things like that, but folding in the things that you want to leave behind. That's a great. Bobby, Tim had mentioned this whole thing about getting prepped for the tell me about yourself, which I think also is one of the most important things to prep for. So Bobby, like what's the tell me about yourself that you that any thoughts on that in general?
Man, if I knew I was going to be asked these questions, I would have prepared as if I was being asked into
Don't ask it.
We're asking a little bit on
but
that.
what are the things that that people do well when they answer that question, and what are things that people don't do that well when they answer that question, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have been involved in some character interviews for Adobe, and something that I'm generally looking for is just like, honestly, that the person can hold a conversation. And by that, I mean, like, the reason I keep harping on sounding scripted or robotic is because when I'm the person interviewing, I really don't like it. So if your answer sounds over prepared, then I'm very much like, I'm just trying to have a conversation with you, like human to human, and see if we can work together. And you are coming off very robotic right now, and that doesn't really seem like someone that I'd want to work with. So that's what I talk about, of like just sounding natural. When I'm asking you to tell me about yourself, and it may be different for other people, but at least for me, it's generally just like, legitimately, just tell me about you. What are your interests? I am interested in people as people. Tell me what you like to do outside of work. If you want to, like Tim, you can work in something that you achieved in work. That's cool too. But just do it in a way that has a natural flow of conversation to it, rather than like, I did this, I like doing this, I am this. Don't make it like very bulleted sentences. Just go with the flow, essentially.
Sometimes there's concern with that I hear from students, and that they catch themselves rambling in answering that question. Have you had that experience, Tim?
Yeah. Definitely without prep, I would catch myself rambling. And so what I did is, and I even sort of gave it at the beginning of this call when I was telling you about myself, is I like to say, I even sometimes do it where I do on the professional side of things, on the personal side of things. And so I'll do, on the professional side of things, I've primarily worked in client relationship management roles across a few different tech startups, advising clients like Staples, Intel Corporation, Hartford Insurance Company on digital marketing strategy. So right there, I've told you a lot in very concise things, and I've added credibility of the clients that I work with. I work in tech, specifically within MarTech, and then go into, really been full cycle customer success. So managing clients post-sale from implementation through to quarterly business reviews, renewals, upsell. I'm giving the specific pieces of my role that I do, because customer success can be different from across all companies. I'll even say, have my MBA in marketing and strategy and currently work at XYZ company. And then on the personal side of things, I'm a native New Yorker, love hiking, travel, big crypto supporter, which can be controversial, and live with my wonderful wife and tuxedo cat Luke. And so my goal there is to tell you professional, add credibility, and then quick personal, so that we can open up a conversation of, oh my God, you have a tuxedo cat, or hey, where did you recently travel to? But everything that Bobby said too, having it really flow. But that piece, ahead of interviews, like over and over in the mirror to nail, how can I concisely relate to you, show credibility, and give you a little bit of my personal side, so that we can open up a conversation that's not just work related. I also, at the beginning of interviews, try to first ask the interviewee, with regard to, they like to be in control to some degree sometimes, but I like to open it up with, hey, how's your week going? Anything exciting going on this week? So that you immediately personalize yourself to them before, like, I don't wait for them to ask me the question first. I want to make sure that we start off with personalizing ourselves, talk about, oh, they might say I'm going on a trip, or I'm taking my kids somewhere, and then they'll ask about you. And so breaking the ice immediately smooths over the whole interview process and everything else from there.
I was going to add that, Tim, that I honestly feel like when I've interviewed, I feel like if I can get the interviewer talking about pretty much anything except the interview, I've won. I've done my job and they have connected to me as a person, and I've distracted them enough, but they're starting to like me because they're talking about, like, to your point, we're talking about our dogs. We're talking about their upcoming trip to Iceland, or we both like the same books or something. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be asking you questions right now. And I'm like, well, we're already best friends, but go ahead, I guess.
Right. And I'm hearing it too, is that it's kind of helping the other person or the interviewer grab onto something else to talk about too, which makes it easier for sure. We're at 20 till, so I want to be cognizant of questions and open up the floor. If there are any questions, just use the raise hand feature. If you don't have questions just yet, that's totally fine, but I don't want to hog the conversation, because I want everybody here to be able to ask some questions too. So on the interviewer side, both Tim, Bobby, anything else that, you've already shared a lot of interview expectations based off of your interview experiences. So that's great. But now, if you've been on the interview side most recently, any other thoughts that come to your mind that you want to share?
I have a really quick one, and this is just because
Great.
this happened to me very recently.
Yeah.
If I ask you to share a project that you're proud of, don't make it one that was like 10 years ago in middle school. That's just not a good practice. And I'm using a very real example where I asked someone to share a project they were proud of, and they talked about how they presented. And it was actually to the whole point about presentations being important. It's a presentation. And they went, oh yeah, it was a presentation on like Martin Luther King. I'm like, oh, that's great. When was that? Oh, it was like in 7th grade. As you might expect, that person did not get particularly high marks from me, because it's like the last presentation that you were proud of was now 10 years ago, and you're trying to go for a internship where you're going to be working on your presentation skills and working with clients a bunch. Yeah, no, but that's just one quick thing. It's just like, if you have examples, make sure they're fairly recent. And even, if we've talked about applying, and I know this is a common thing, but if you're applying to a role, make sure that you're tailoring your resume to have relevant experiences, because like, for the most part, if I'm the one trying to hire you, while it's nice that you were maybe like the only male babysitter in your town, I don't care, because that was 20 years ago, and I want to know what you've done more recently.
Oh yeah. Agreed. And just to piggyback off that, so I interviewed a bunch of customer success managers. The main things that I'm looking for, and depends on what the role is. Again, I specifically work in MarTech, generally within data, and also on the sales side. And so I'm looking, first off, do I like you as a person? Like, are we relatable? Secondly, can I trust you in front of enterprise clients? Can I trust you to hold yourself? If you're going to get thrown off, are you able to handle objections and work around things quickly? 3, and again, this is more specific to MarTech and data, but can you analyze the data? And 4, can you pitch value? Can you sell? And I want you to, show me, not tell me. If I ask, what's, I know you've worked in revenue roles, like what's your experience there? What kind of revenue? I don't want the, yeah, I've worked in revenue roles and I've won a lot of revenue. I've blown my things out of the, my targets out of the water. I want to hear, what your targets were. How did you achieve that? How were you going up against another company in the request for proposal process? How did you box the other guys out? What were the targets that you achieved? And again, how you achieved it, rather than just telling me that you did achieve it, if that makes sense. Like the show, not tell.
And with the metrics of what those numbers were and the percent change, maybe, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But
one thing both of you've talked about is the work you put into prep for questions that you most likely think you're going to get based off of the role. So we talked about, okay, you should probably be ready for, when was the last time you've done it? When's the last time you've done a presentation, or what's your favorite presentation? Just like Bobby mentioned, right? Revenue, customer interaction, client interaction, possibly breaking the ice. How did you come up with, though, with some of these, with the expectation of what kind of questions you most likely will get?
Great question. So some of it was by talking to other people who've worked in those roles.
Oh, right.
Some of it is looking at what the actual role responsibilities are in the job description, and then thinking about the sort of boilerplate ones. I hate when I get asked about biggest strengths, biggest weakness, but I prep for them because you have to. And I think about what might they want to see, just in terms of both my work and me as a person. So I prep for things like biggest career achievement, biggest client win, biggest client loss. I do prep for the describe yourself in 4 words, just to have it. Tell me about a difficult client engagement. Data-driven advice you've given a client. Time you've demonstrated leadership. Why do you want to work for my company? What can you bring to my company? Take me through a client engagement from start to finish. What are you looking for in a team or in a boss? Why did you, go through your MBA? How are your analytical skills, your Excel skills? Pitch me your company or pitch me something. What are your career goals? What do you do to have fun? All those types of things are the things both. I mean, at this point, I've worked in customer success for a while, but before I did, talking to friends who work in customer success, looking at the job description, and then creating mini stories to again show them rather than tell them.
The only thing I'll add there, because Tim hit the nail on the head, is the most beneficial thing to do is talk to people, listen to what they do in the role, and then expect the sorts of questions that you might get based on what they're telling you their day-to-day looks like.
And by doing that, right, I think the trickle down effect for a candidate, you both can call BS on me if it's wrong, but the trickle down effect of that preparation decreases the anxiety of the interview process. And I think it also highlights oh my God, if I hate all these things, this is probably not the role for me. If I have to talk about these things too.
100%.
You also just learn to speak the language that they're speaking. So, for example, a term, and I'm just going to rattle off random terms here, but mutual success plan is something that pretty much all, or customer plan, or get well plan for customers that are unhealthy or things of that nature. You just start learning like the acronyms or languages that people use to call things certain things, so that when you show up to that interview and you're talking about like, oh yeah, I know what a get well plan is, they're like, oh, this person is speaking, even though it's technically still English, they're speaking the same language that I am, and so they must know something about this.
Oh yeah, totally agreed. And yeah, really, even, applying to the job that I applied for, I've been working for 1 year and 6 months in my current role, and I had worked in customer success previously, but yeah, I had anxiety going into talking to new people. And like Justyn mentioned, I mean, creating those mini stories, creating the, star method stories to highlight your experience, and going through it, and just thinking deeply about who you are as a person, what you like, what you don't like, what you like in different roles. Like once you know yourself and how it relates to the job that you're applying to, completely, sure, you might have some nerves going on in the interview process, but really builds confidence so that first thing that you comes out of your mouth is going to be confident when you speak to the hiring manager or whoever that might be.
Totally.
Just to build off Tim's thought really quick, Justyn.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so I used to be someone, and I totally acknowledge this, that if I talked to anyone who I thought was important, my eyes would actually like glaze over pretty much just from like the nerves. At the end of the day, and I know it's a cliche, but everyone puts their pants on, one leg at a time. And that's the whole thing about that I've been trying to get across about customer success in general, is you need to be a people person and interested in people. And when you realize that most of these interviews, sure, they're a structured form, but they're just a structured form of having a conversation with another person, it becomes so much easier because you stop putting that pressure on yourself of like, oh, to Tim's point, I'm talking to the VP of customer success. It's like, no, I'm talking to Erica, who has,
Right.
2 dogs and goes on vacations with her family to Maine.
Right.
To
love
be
that.
on that, I do a few different things where beforehand I'll literally try to convince myself that whoever the person that I'm talking to, the interviewer, is like, my uncle's friend, and like I really try to like believe that and internalize that, so that it's not some stranger, it's not some scary person. Keeping things on even playing field where, sure, it might be the chief customer success officer at whatever, the biggest bank in the world, but if you feel that, it might feel scary. But if you think of yourselves as an equal to them, it super helps as you go into the interview process.
Yeah. Totally. I want to spend some time also, we got a couple minutes, but it might be on people's minds in general of those, hey, do you have any questions for me? What are some of the experiences you've had on the interviewer side of what you wanted? So not sort of peppering, hey, here's some great questions to ask in every interview, but what are some questions you want to hear from a candidate?
Oh yeah. I want them to really figure out, if I haven't told them about the day-to-day responsibilities, like to really dig into what does the day-to-day look like, what are the KPIs, how do I know I'm being successful, really understand what the responsibilities are. For customer success, since some roles can be more strategic, some roles can be more sales oriented, some roles can be more operational. I want them to dig into, again, by deducing, what is this role actually. I like when they ask me about, how many clients is my book of business, so that they understand, is it high touch versus low touch. I want them to ask me about, management style. Is it company culture wise? Is it like sort of prescribed versus lenient? What does communication look like? As a manager, is it, more of a coaching relationship or operational relationship? And I want them to ask me these things, not in those exact words. I want them to, figure out what behaviors are going to be rewarded within the company internally. really dig into the culture, and yeah, see if they understand to ask like who they're going to be working with internally, not only within our customer success org, but are they going to touch with solutions engineering, data team,
Right.
So that they fully know what they're getting into, as well as yeah, whether it's going to be a good path forward.
So I absolutely love everything that Tim just said. Couldn't agree more. I think at like a high level, I just want them to ask me questions that show that they're sincerely interested in the job. And you can kind of tell when people are asking questions, just ask questions, and when they're really getting into specifics of like, tell me more about like this specific point you made earlier on the day-to-day and what that looks like. It's like, oh, that's actually a really good question. It shows you were paying attention to what I said earlier when I answered one of your other questions or I was talking. Or just general things like that. It's not so much about the question you ask, at least for me. It's much more about in asking that question, you're showing that this isn't just, the 100th interview that you had of the day, and maybe it is, but don't act like it is.
Right.
And to ask follow-up questions, like, when I get an answer, to dig deeper into it. They ask me, how's the culture? I go, culture is great. If that's it and we move on, they didn't do
Right.
due diligence.
That did just remind me of one other thing Tim said, which was I want a candidate who is not just trying to figure out whether we're a right fit for them or that they're a right fit for us, but that we're a right fit for them, meaning they're considering where they want to be in their career and they're asking questions to show, okay, yes, maybe Adobe is a great company, but by asking these questions, I'm making sure that Adobe is a right fit for me and where I want to go in my career, because that tells me that's a person who wants to succeed with us and also has given a lot of thought to this. And it's not just based on like, the name recognition or what have you, but they really have given thought to, I want to be here.
So are you suggesting, Bobby, that somebody could even be as bold to say, in my next role, it's really important for me to be able to do X or to experience Y? Could you talk about how that happens at your organization?
If I got that kind of question, I would give that person incredibly high marks just based on that question alone.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes. I could stay on here for actually a couple of hours. I just don't know if Vivek and Emmett and Raul and Will, or the two of you. I don't even care about the two of you. What have we not talked about? Because we really, again, I want, it's really important for us to have heard what you went through on your interview process, because that's obviously what you're putting people through when you're interviewing them. What have we not touched on? Because we've touched on a ton. Anything that you think we haven't covered, Bobby, Tim? And again, if there's any questions from anybody that wants to ask, please just raise your hand.
I have a quick one to share.
Yeah, please.
It's essentially just, I will fully acknowledge, and I shouldn't be saying this on a customer success bootcamp, but I actually went to grad school to pivot away from customer success. And I was talking myself out of applying for this role because of how I felt about the previous role. One thing to keep in mind is that they are very different at different companies. So I did just want to touch on, if you've had like a bad customer success experience at another company, don't allow that to discourage you from applying to other roles, just because my experience at Adobe and my previous company could not be more different. And I have found, especially since I'm now trying to talk other people into it, as you can see, that the role really does work for me. Yeah. So just keep that in mind.
Totally.
One other quick thing that I'll just mention is, since, post-COVID, a lot of a lot of interviews do happen over Zoom. Like, I literally set up like a beautiful background, I put flowers on it, not that I know obviously we all work out of whatever house situation, living situation we're in, but having the first thing when they first see you come on, having, your lighting good and your background looking beautiful just gives a good first impression. Not totally necessary. And I again recognize that we all work out of what we have. Like I wouldn't use this as a when I'm interviewing.
Yeah. Good point. That's a really good point.
First impressions.
Although maybe add a Spider-Man poster, Tim.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing. My question, it relates to what Tim was saying earlier about mentioning sort of revenue targets and how you might have exceeded them. You know, keeping in mind that some of us don't quite have that CSM role, if we can sort of draw those parallels to maybe it was a marketing acquisition campaign and here was the target, here's how we exceeded it. That would still be okay from the CSM hiring manager perspective.
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, showing the goals that you've achieved and showing that you understand how you achieved them is what will go a long way. And you could even show that example and then think about, how would you achieve your targets here? I looked at your products and I saw that you sell X. I also saw that there are these add-on products that you have, thinking about a use case of how I would do this. But I think exactly what you said, if there are marketing goals and really showing that you understand how you did that so that it's replicable across another company, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. So it won't be sort of a subtraction of a point if you use percentages versus dollar signs. Because what I'm gathering is, there's a real sales component to CSM.
Great question, because so for my role, there's a sales component. Not true for all customer success roles.
For my role, there is no sales component.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And so for me, I would look for people who have some kind of experience selling. There are also like different levels, like we have associate roles where we don't expect sales experience. And as Bobby said, not all customer success. You can absolutely find customer success without sales. Happy to take more questions, by the way. I know we're done, but
Thanks, Emmett.
Yeah.
Vivek.
Hi, Mr. Justyn. Hey.
Hey.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Bobby. Thank you so much for your time. And it's great to hear everything that you have to say and kind of gain that hands-on experience and that knowledge. Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of like skills or softwares that you would use for the CRM or the sales process, like I've been familiar with like Pipedrive and Salesforce, but are those things that you really need to like mention? Like, I don't know if like companies would be using their own software or if it's something that you should talk more about, or if you should just kind of mention it in general.
All I was going to say is that I jokingly was going to plug Adobe CRM here, but that said, we do use Salesforce, although I will say, to Tim's point about being sales focused or not sales focused, Salesforce is much more for our sales team. I can go in there sometimes to get information that I may need from the contract, but we also have our own systems and we use that essentially. And one of them is an internal system, so it wouldn't be something you were aware of. But just generally showing that you do have some experience with CRM is probably beneficial. Before I got this role, I had on my resume that I'm familiar with HubSpot and Salesforce, for example. And I'm sure they looked at that and said like, okay, he knows how to use a CRM.
And just to add to that, one thing I'll also do, I like to understand when I'm the interviewee, I'm being interviewed, I like to understand what tech stack my potential future company works with. So I'll ask them, what do you use for XYZ, to see what they use for project management, what they use for CRM, things like that, so that it also shows them, I'm familiar with these tools, but I also legitimately want to know what they work with, because there's some tools I hate to work with, some tools that I don't.
Thanks for the question, Vivek. All right, we're at time. I want to say again a huge thank you to both of you, Tim, Bobby, for this second part of the series. This is so great, and we're going to make this available for you and for students to listen to. So truly appreciate it, and thanks for being so candid, and thanks for everybody for asking great questions and being engaging. We really appreciate all of your support and can't wait till next time.
Appreciate it and happy Thursday.
Happy
Yeah, thank you
Thursday.
for having us, Justin. And yeah, happy Thursday.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you. Bye-bye.